Skanda, Amog, and there are Arya Uday Kumar. Can you please turn on your video?
Yes, sir. Just joined.
Uh,
Just a minute.
and turn off your audio, please. Aniket, can you also turn off your audio, please? Thank you. So here we go. Have you all read the passage? Okay, so I'll be opening the chat box where you will have to type your answer to every question. So can you see question number 1 on your screen? Okay. Now, before we go and solve the first question, we should understand what the passage is all about. The passage is talking about 3 lists in the Constitution of India. So you know that in India we have 2 sorts of government. One is the central government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and then there are several state governments. For instance, in Karnataka we have the Karnataka state government, which is led by Mr. Yedurappa. Okay, so he is the chief minister. So what happens is the Constitution of India provides that on certain matters, the central government led by Mr. Narendra Modi can make laws. On certain matters, only the state government can make law. So on those subjects, law can be different from one state of India to another state of India. But on the issues on which the central government is making law, the law will be the same throughout the territory of India. And thirdly, there is a concurrent list. A concurrent list is a list on which both the state government as well as the central government can make the law. So in this passage, the author is arguing that NRC, NPR, and the matters of citizenship, all of it comes within the domain of center, which is the part how through the union list. So there is not much which the state can do. So the state can only make law or give their opinion in matters concerning the state list or at best the concurrent list. But as far as the matter related to the national list or the union list is concerned, only the central government can make the law. So since NRC, NPR and citizenship are mentioned in the union list, state cannot make the law and state cannot refuse whatever the center is dictating to them. If the state refuses to do so, then a emergency can be imposed on those states, because that will be a constitutional breakdown. So the constitution envisages a subordinate superior relationship between the state and the center. The states are subordinate to the dictates of the center as far as the union list is concerned. So whenever the state will refuse to agree to the central point of view regarding any law, the state will be liable for defect in constitutional administration, and a emergency can be imposed. So this is in nutshell the entire argument that the author talks to us about. So as per this, what do you think? Can states first question is something that we will need to encounter. Can states legally refuse to implement the NPR and the NRC? You can unmute yourself and give me the answer. Yes or no? What do you think?
No,
No, the states cannot refuse to implement the NPR and the NRC. So this leaves us with only two options, B and D. Now, what do you think is the correct reasoning? So let me go to Meghna and ask her, why do you think D is the correct reasoning and not B? Meghna, can you unmute yourself and give me the answer?
Sir, I have no idea.
Yes, Meghna.
Hello.
Okay, I can't hear you. Okay, Skanda, can you tell me why do you think D is the right answer? Can you please unmute yourself, Skanda?
Yes, sir. Mm,
Yes. Now tell me, why do you think D is the right answer? So the first thing that we need to understand is citizenship is a subject of the union list on which only union government can make law. So D is, while D gives us the correct answer, it gives us the incorrect reasoning. So D cannot be the right answer. So the right answer automatically becomes B, as there is no valid argument that they can use for not implementing these proposals. So whatever the central government tells the state to do for the NRC and NPR, the state government will have to abide by it, and hence B is the right answer. So most of you, apart from Aniket, have given the wrong answer. So is this reasoning clear to all of you? If there is any doubt, please stop me in the middle. Now, coming to question 2. Please read this. Amok, please turn on your video. Give me answer to question number 2 in the chat box. Adit, can you please turn on your video
Yes, sir.
and please mute yourself again? Okay, guys, give me the answer to question number 2 ASAP. Okay. So a lot of you are with answer option A and some of you are with multiple other options, but no one tells me that D is the right answer. Okay, so let me first go to Sanchit. Sanchit, can you please tell me why do you think C is the right answer?
So, because in the first
Yes, Sanchit.
paragraph of question 1, it
Sanchit,
said
can
that
you be
the
a little
NPR
louder?
will be the.
A little louder, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. So in the first paragraph for question 1, it said that the NPR would be the base database for the NRC as stated in several government documents, and that's why I chose C as my answer.
Okay. So you are saying that by government document it is clear that ministers have stated.
Sorry, sir, I didn't understand what you just said.
So why do you think C reasons that because other ministers from her ministry, that there have been other ministers from the home ministry?
I didn't. Oh no, I didn't read that. I didn't read that part. I just thought it meant that it was made from the. Oh no. Okay, sorry, sir, I was wrong then.
You want to change?
Oh yeah, I'd like to change it to A then.
Okay, that's a grave mistake you will do if you do not read the reasoning correctly. There are always going to be two right answer and only one with the right reasoning. So let me then go back to someone who has chosen B, Sutej. Sutej, can you tell me why B is the right answer? Sutej, are you here? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Sir.
Yeah.
So after reading the passage and all, I thought B would be appropriate.
Okay. So what went around in so? Why do you think so? So you believe the Home Minister is correct in his assessment that there will be no link to NRC, NPR, NCAA?
Yes, sir.
Why?
Yeah, because even I think so. Yeah, like there's no link between both.
Okay, okay, okay. Now let me go to Raghav. Raghav, can you tell me why do you think A is the right answer? Unmute yourself, Raghav.
Yeah, sir, I can see the last paragraph says that. One second.
Okay, should I go to the last paragraph? Here.
Yeah, so here only. Population of a register means.
Sorry?
The bottommost paragraph.
The bottommost.
Before the question.
Yes, read it out for me.
Yeah. So scroll down.
Okay. Where do you want me to take you to the question or where? Okay, let me delete this part so that
Yeah, go to the question, sir. Go to the question. I'll tell you.
yeah. Now,
Yeah, population register means the register containing details of person, usually that one. Demarcated, yeah, that one, sir.
okay, great. So to establish a link, so we will argue that there is a link between the NRC and NPR, and where do we get it? We get it from here. I'll be highlighting it. The National Register of Indian Citizens, which is NRIC, which is essentially NRC, shall be divided into two subparts consisting of the State Register of Indian Citizen, the District Register of Indian Citizen, the Sub-District Register of Indian Citizen, and the Local Register of Indian Citizens, and shall contain such details as the central government by order in consultation with the Registrar General of Citizen Registration specify. So this tells us about what the NRC will have. And then we are given this population register means the register containing details of person usually residing in village or rural area or town or ward or demarcated area demarcated by the Registrar General of Citizen Registration within a ward in a town or urban area. And then this last part, the local register of Indian citizens shall contain details of person after due verification made from the population register. So first there will be a population register that will be made, and only then a local register for Indian citizens, which is NRC, will take its data from the population register, which is NPR. So the NRC will take data from NPR, and this is clarified here. And hence our respected home minister has not made the correct statement. So he is incorrect. And why is he incorrect? The correct answer is A, because the rules clearly show that the local register of Indian citizens, a subdivision of the NRC, will be made from data verified from the NPR. So this is the reasoning. Does anyone have any doubt so far? Was the rationalization adequate? Okay, moving on to the third question. Okay, so most of you believe that A is the right answer, which indeed it is. So the statement that the Home Minister is making, that there is no link between the NRC and the NPR, and which, as we have found in the last question, is incorrect. So hence he has given a false information to the House. And if someone gives the false information to the House deliberately, it constitutes breach of privilege, and hence the Home Minister will be liable for the breach of privilege, because A, he has made a false statement, and B, he has made it deliberately. So he will be liable. Now, why answer option B, C, and D are not correct? Because B and D tells us that the Home Minister is not liable, which is incorrect. He is liable. And C, the C answer option talks about malice, which is not something that we are concerned with. So as far as the statement is false and it is intentional, the breach of privilege will be constituted, or the offense of breach of privilege will be constituted, and hence our Home Minister is liable for breach of privilege. Now, if you have any doubt, please tell me. Please raise your hand or unmute yourself, interrupt in the between. That will be all fine. I'll always assume that you have understood it, and we will move to the next question. Okay, now fourth. Oh shit. Sorry. Can you please? Sorry. Answer to question number 4. Please give it again for those who have given it for answer option or question number 3. Please give it again. So Aniket, Amog, if this is your answer for question number 4, please type it again. I forgot to reply. Skanda, are you here with us? You have turned off your video. Please turn it on. Please, people, give me the answer to question number 4. It's been quite some time. Okay, great. Vibha, can you tell me why you think A is the right answer? Please unmute yourself, Vibha.
Sir, I went to the passage again. I realized that it's C because if we go to the paragraph which says that if the president on receipt report of the report from the governor of the state is satisfied that the situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on accordance with the provision of this constitution, we can say that it's C, sir.
C.
Yeah.
Okay. Amit, why do you think A is the right answer?
Oh, because I thought the president may be proclamation to declare an emergency state.
Okay. Maitri Gautam, can you tell me why you think A is the right answer? Maitri Gautam.
I'm actually not sure now. Like,
You're not sure, Maitri?
yeah.
Okay, it's all right. Now, okay. So let's understand this question. As I told you in the beginning of this, while I was explaining this passage, that the state has a duty to abide by whatever the center has got to say with respect to NPR and NRC because they fall under the domain of the union list. Now, there is obviously a possibility that the state may not abide by the direction given by the center. In that case, what the center can do or what the constitution envisages this possibility and how the remedy of this possibility is for the president of India to hold that there has arisen a situation which is fit for the declaration of an emergency in the state. So once there is an emergency declared in the state government no longer functions. So it is not the chief minister who is calling the shots in the state once the emergency is declared, but it is rather the prime minister and the union government through the president who is calling the shots. So this is the functional utility of an emergency. So one thing that we have to realize that if the state do not abide by the direction of the state, the president can declare an emergency. That is the first thing that we have to understand. The second thing that we have to understand is how an emergency is declared. The emergency is only declared when the state governor gives a report to the president, which is here in Article 356, Clause 1. So the president can declare the emergency if he thinks the situation is not fit. And how will he think that the situation is not fit? Only upon the receipt of a report to that effect by the governor of the state. But in this case, since the governor has not given any report so far, the president is not empowered to declare an emergency. So the correct answer option becomes C. So if anyone, Maitri, is it clear now? Maitri, is the explanation clear? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I understood.
Is it perfectly clear, Maitri?
I have to read it again and I will.
Sure. Please. Now moving on to question number 5. Okay, so I'll give you a brief information which was also mentioned in the passage in case you remembered it. For a name to be included in the NPR, you should either live at a place for the last 6 months or you should intend to live at that place for the next 6 months. So if one of these conditions or both the conditions are satisfied, only then can your name be entered into the NPR. So this is the condition on which the entire answer to this question hinges. Okay, Ashrita, tell me why this is, why you think C is the right answer? Ashrita S. Yes, Ashrita. I see some of you are progressively turning your video off. I can see all of you. This Meghna, please turn on your video. Then we have Arya Uday Kumar Shetty who has turned off his video. Meghna and Uday, please turn on your videos.
Sir, I have slow internet connection, so is it fine if the video is off?
Sure, sure.
I keep disconnecting.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Aniket, can you please tell me why you think C is the right answer?
So under the definition given, it means that intent is a verb as defined to have a definite plan or purpose. In the question, it's given that he was in two minds about living in the local area and was contemplating leaving the same within 6 months. Furthermore, in the paragraph, it was given that the person must have lived in the same area for 6 months at least to be included in the registry. Therefore, C is the right answer.
Okay. Vishal, you have just joined. Welcome to the session. Can you please turn on your video?
Yes, sir. Give me 2 minutes, sir.
Sure. Okay, great. So C is the right answer because two conditions need to be met, or one of those two conditions need to be met in order for your name to be included in the NPR. Is firstly, either you should have been residing in that place for the past 6 months, or either you should be intending to reside in this place for the next 6 months. If none of these conditions are met, your name will not be included in the NPR, that is the National Population Register. Now consider my case. So I study in Bangalore in NLSIU, but for the past 3 or 4 months, ever since March, I am here because of the lockdown. And I really do not know when my college will reopen. So I do not intend to stay here for the next 6 months. So if the NPR were to happen today and the government will come and ask me whether if I am residing at this place for the past 6 months, I'll say no. And if they ask me whether I intend to reside at this place for the next 6 months, I'll also say no, because I really do not know whether my college will open or not in the next 6 months. So interestingly, my name will not be included in the NPR as well. So these are some of the problems that the NPR has. So this was it for the first passage. If any one of you have any doubt, please raise your hand or unmute yourself. We'll be moving to the next passage.
Sir, so the NPR offers no solution to this problem at all. Your name won't be included in any local registry.
Yes, my name will not be included in any local registry if it were to happen today, because I've not been residing in Bangalore for the last 6 months, so I cannot be included in the Bangalore registry. Neither am I residing in Madhya Pradesh, where I belong, for the last 6 months, or nor do I intend. So my name will not be included in any registry. But practically,
So even the
yes, please.
In the national registry.
Even in the national registry, because national registry will consist of local registries. So national registry, in my view, although I have not read the provisions so far because those are not yet out, will be a accumulation of every local registry. So local registry from area A and B will be included in the sub registry of a district or sub district. Then all sub districts will be accumulated for the registry of a district, and similar, so forth and so forth. Our national registry will be made. There will not be 4 different exercises for all the registry. In which case, I have been residing in India for the past many years, and I intend to reside in India for the past many years. In which case, I'll be included in the national registry. But this is not how it will work. Moving on to the second passage. Okay, I hope it is visible. It's very small. We'll have to do with it. I can probably change the layout to landscape, in which case it will be far better. Let me check that. Is it relatively better now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I'll just connect my charger. Okay, guys, have you read the passage? Please raise your hand if you have read the passage. Okay, it's enough time. Let's move on to the first question. I'll explain you the passage in brief. An incident happened not so long ago where a sitting judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Arun Mishra, on a public forum when he was giving one of his speeches, praised Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, this created a lot of furor because judiciary and executive has to be separated. Because a lot of time the Indian government is one of the defendant in many of the cases against the state. So if you are openly commenting and praising the leader of the government, you are actually in the mind of the common person who is going to file a case against the government are seeing or he will be able or he will see some degree of bias in you, that you like the policy of the leader and hence you are unlikely to give any verdict which goes against the establishment. So this is something that the author argues, that the conduct of Justice Arun Mishra was not proper personal conduct, and he cites various Supreme Court judgments as well as some of the one of the charters which tells us what is the expected degree of conduct for a Supreme Court judge. So let's see the first question or the sixth question and understand what does it mean. So let me again change the orientation to portrait. Okay, now my computer is hanged. But can you see the first sixth question? We will need answer option D. Okay, just give me a moment. So we are back to the Zoom chat. Let me again open the file. Can you see question number 6?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So give me its answer in the chat box, please. Sanchit, Meghna, Vishal, please turn on your video. Meghna. Okay. So, Arya Uday Kumar, why do you think A is the right answer?
Sir, I couldn't see how the charter coming under the term resolutions would hold any relevance to the statement of values of judicial life.
Okay. Okay. So let's
I
understand.
mean, like those two seem like two separate cases.
Okay. So let's understand question 6 correctly. It's a complicated question. Question 6 reads that the principle is resolution adopted by full court of the Supreme Court are enforceable. And the fact is, which of the following is not a relevant factor in determining if Justice Arun Mishra is liable for violating value 6 of the restatement of values of judicial life? So one can only be liable for violating value 6 if value 6 is a part of resolution, and value 6 is contained in the charter. So if charter is part of the resolution, then he can be made liable. So this is a relevant factor. Secondly, whether Justice Arun Mishra intended to violate value 6 of the restatement when he made the statement is immaterial, is irrelevant, because intention is something that we are not concerned with. We are concerned with how the judge conducts himself and not whether how he intends to conduct himself. So he may just spit in the public out of a necessity without intending to do so. Even then he would have done something which is unbecoming of the judge. So the intention is irrelevant. So the right answer is B. Why C relevant whether practicing the degree of aloofness in value 6 implies that a judge can't give normative comments about the work of the executive. So the answer to this question directly determine whether the judge is liable for violating value 6 or not. So the correct answer is answer B. I see this was a complicated question. So if you have any doubt, please let me know. Please unmute your.
Can you explain why the answer is B, sir? Again.
Sorry, Dhruv, you were inaudible.
Can you explain why the answer is B again, sir?
Sure. So we have to identify whether or not Justice Mishra has violated a value 6 of the restatement, and we exactly have to determine whether if all of these statements will be relevant for the result of knowing whether or not value 6 has been violated. So let's read value 6. Value 6 say a judge should practice a degree of aloofness consistent with the dignity of his office. This value 6 nowhere mentions anything pertaining to intention of the judge. So it does not matter what the judge intended to do. So intention of the judge becomes irrelevant. Does it answer your question, Dhruv?
Right. Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, question number 7 now. Okay, Vishal, can you explain why you, Vishal, have you given your answer? What is your answer, Vishal? Vishal, are you here? Okay.
Sir, A, sir.
A. Why so? Okay. So the entire passage is predicated on the assumption that there should not be a one homie between the executive and the judiciary, because the judiciary is there to keep the executive abuses in check. So there is a separation of power, and their separation entails that there should not be any friendship between executive and judiciary. Both of them are separate organs of the government and should work out to be so. So the moment we say that this is desirable, as it will make the government fast and efficient, the author is likely to disagree with the statement, as it will not only lead to a fast and efficient government, but also may risk to a corrupt governance. Because if the state does not do anything correctly, we can go to the judiciary. But even when, or consider a situation where the judiciary becomes the friend of the executive, in that case, we have no resort. So the government will be given a free rein, and they will do whatever they please to do. And that will be an undesirable situation. So let's go to question number 8. Okay. Aniket, can you tell me why you think B is the right answer?
Basically, according to the jurist, the test of judicial bias is whether a reasonable person in all circumstances of the case would have a reasonable apprehension that there would not be a fair trial from an impartial judge. When Justice Mishra makes such comments, it creates reasonable apprehension that there will not be that there will be bias in favor of the government in any case against the government put forth before him. Therefore, B is the correct answer.
Okay. So basically, we have to understand bias or the question of bias from the perspective of a reasonable man, and who would know, given all the facts and circumstances of the case, who would form an opinion. So if Justice Mishra is commending Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it means a reasonable person is likely to believe that Justice Mishra will agree with whatever policy Mr. Narendra Modi makes. Now, the government of Mr. Narendra Modi makes up a policy of CAA. So it is likely that the Justice Mishra is going to be in favor of that policy, which makes him partial towards the government, and hence the plaintiff's allegation from looking at it from the reasonable man's perspective will not be invalid, and hence Justice Mishra should ideally recuse, as his comments create a reasonable apprehension that he might be biased in favor of the policies of the government. Is the right answer. Does anyone have a different answer or a different reasoning? But I see all of you have said B, while most of you have not said anything. So does anyone have a different answer? Okay, moving on to 9th. Okay, sorry. Let me just say 9. Okay, so Article 50 of the Constitution is a directive principle which are not enforceable. And one of the directive principle is that there should be a separation between the judiciary and the executive. Now, something that is not enforceable, we cannot go and argue that in a court of law. Enforceability means that if I have a right and it is enforceable, I can go to the court and ask the court to enforce that right. But since it is not enforceable, I cannot claim Article 50 successful in a court. And hence, B becomes the right answer. A will not be successful as Article 50 is not enforceable in court. This is the right reasoning. D is again right, but it has an incorrect reasoning which says that A will not be successful as there is ample separation between the judiciary and the executive in India. Something that is clearly not visible in India and something that is extraneous to the information given in the passage. So only on the ground that Article 50 is not enforceable, A will be deemed unsuccessful in the court of law. The court is not going to entertain a petition filed by Mr. A. Does anyone have any doubt with this explanation?
So if a case like this was brought up in real life, if the Supreme Court agreed with the plaintiff, would the Supreme Court have the power to order that it be made enforceable in a court of law?
Yes. So if you practically speaking, there is another power in the hand of the Supreme Court, which is Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, which is the power to do complete justice. So the Supreme Court can do anything that it deems fit in order to give justice to people. So if Supreme Court believes that something should be done to give justice to people, they can do so. So even then they can make Article 50 enforceable. But a smart lawyer who will file the petition on Mr. A's behalf is likely to couch this petition in terms of other articles which are enforceable. For instance, it can say that the separation of power under the Indian Constitution is part of the basic structure. So they can, lawyers are always going to argue and skirt the process of unenforceability smartly. So practically a different case will be there. So moving on to question number 10. I realized there is a lot of sunshine on me. Okay, just give me a moment. Okay, again, fairly simple question. We have to identify whether this will constitute contempt. So what does contempt mean? Criminal contempt means the publication of any matter or the doing of any other act whatsoever which interferes or tends to interfere with obstruction of justice in any manner. So there has been a article, the current article which we are reading. So the first factor, whether the act of the author amounts to publication under the act, will be relevant because we have to identify whether there has been a publication or not. So contempt, as you will see, have several elements. The first element is publication. The second element is in the interference of the publication with the administration of justice. So there should be first a publication, and then that publication should interfere with the administration of justice. So these are the two elements that a contempt petition should necessarily have. So one is indeed relevant. Administration of justice, its meaning is also important. So what does the meaning, or what does administration of justice mean? Only when once we are able to identify the correct contours of administration of justice, will we be able to identify whether there has been a contempt or not. So in this case, this is also a relevant factor. And see whether the article can be said to interfere with or obstruct the administration of justice. This is the second element that we have talked about. So even this will be relevant, whether the article or the publication interferes with the administration or obstructs the administration of justice in any manner. So the only factor which will not be relevant is whether the article were published in state level newspaper or national level newspaper, because both of the factors will constitute publication. And as long as there is publication, it does not matter whether it is in the national level newspaper or a state level newspaper. So D will be a irrelevant factor. Okay, does anyone have any doubt so far?
So if the Supreme Court actually tried the case, then it wouldn't be successful, right?
Why?
So because it's not actually affecting the administration of justice.
We really do not know. So it will be a fact-based inquiry. We will have to see whether there has been any obstruction or not, and this will be judged with additional factors. But right now we are only concerned with the factors which will be relevant in the determination of the question. We are not concerned with the actual determination of the question. We are just concerned with the tools that we will require in determining the question. So to answer the question directly, whether or not the Supreme Court will determine it to be a obstruction with justice is unclear, ambiguous. It will depend on the additional facts that are not given in the passage.
No, so but hypothetically, how would an article in a newspaper hinder the administration of justice?
Okay, there can be multiple ways in which the publication in a newspaper can obstruct the administration of justice. So administration of justice is also to do with the respect that the verdict of the Supreme Court has in the eyes of the common man. So if I as a national newspaper or even as a state newspaper continuously bash Supreme Court in my editorial, I'll reduce the image or the respect that the Supreme Court enjoys in the perspective or in the imagination of the common man. And by doing so, it is likely that when the Supreme Court orders something, the common man is not going to respect it. So this is one way in which a newspaper can obstruct the administration of justice. Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So moving on to passage 3, something which is very dear to my heart. Okay, let me again try and change the layout and see if my computer does not hang. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so this is the relevant part. Okay. Okay, so you have got 4 minutes to read this passage. Please read this ASAP. Guys, 4 minutes. You should have read this passage by 6:26. It's a very easy passage compared to the other two which we have read. Okay, guys, you can raise your hand once you are done with the passage. 1 more minute to go. If you have read the passage, please raise your hand. Don't give me a thumbs up. Just raise your hand. You can see that in the participants link. So if you open the participants, you can raise your hand like Amit has raised. Great, great Amit. Okay, final 60 seconds. Okay, time's up. Pooja, were you able to finish the passage? Please unmute yourself and tell me. Pooja? Okay, Raghav, were you able to finish reading the passage?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Raghav, were you able to finish it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you didn't raise your hand. Great.
I can't find it here, sir.
Okay, okay. Oh, all right. So let's move on to the first question. Before that, just let me give you a brief context to this. We, the students of NLSIU, did a protest last September in order to get a vice chancellor. So our previous vice chancellor has retired in the last week of July, and there was the post of vice chancellor which was lying vacant. And as we understood it back then, there was the name of our current vice chancellor was cleared by the Chief Justice of India, who is the chancellor of the university, but he was not being appointed. And the then registrar was, as we apprehended, was doing something in order to subvert the entire process, so that 2 years later, when he becomes eligible to become the vice chancellor, he is considered as the vice chancellor of the National Law School. So this is some conspiracy which was going on, as we believed it back then, and hence we decided to hold a protest so that we can get our voice heard across. And the candidate that we preferred to become as our vice chancellor, Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy, becomes the vice chancellor of our university. Our protest indeed became successful, with the Chief Justice of India assuring us that Professor Sudhir will be made the vice chancellor, and 3 days later, 3 days after we have withdrawn our protest, Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy was ultimately indeed made the vice chancellor of the National Law School. So the following questions which you are going to encounter in this passage will concern themselves with the right to protest and the Article 19 freedom of protection from or the right to freedom of assembly which is given under the Indian Constitution. So you have a right to peaceful assembly under the Indian Constitution. So this is something that the following questions will be concerned with mostly. So moving on to question number 11. Okay, so this question is a tricky question, something that you will need to keep in mind that Article 19 protections are given only to the citizens of this country. So if you read the first line of Article 19, it says all citizens shall have the right. So in India, only the citizens can protest. It cannot be any other foreign national who can come and start protesting in India as far as the reading of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution is concerned. So in this case, what we see is that a foreign national is being taken into the custody. Now, a foreign national is obviously not the citizen of India. And if he is not the citizen of India, this act of police is not violative of Article 19. So the correct answer becomes answer D. Let's move to the next question, which is a related question. Question number 12. Okay, so another trick question, it is best. The question tells us that we have to understand the facts of question 1, which is indeed question number 11, all of which are applicable to this question. Now, question 11, the citizen or the person concerned is not a citizen of this country. And even in question 12, disregarding everything else, the act will not be violative of Article 19 because the same student who has been taken into custody is a foreign national and he is not a citizen of this country. So CLAT may sometimes throw a question which may look something else, but is a very simple question indeed. So all of the information which has been given to you here is completely useless. The only thing that you should be concerned with is that Article 19 is only applicable or is only available for the citizens of this country. And because the person who has been taken into custody is a foreign national, he cannot be given the protection under Article 19. So this will be question number 12. Now moving on to question number 13. Okay, Aniket, that was really fast. Okay, so it talks about offer and acceptance. So an acceptance can only be communicated to the person who is making the offer, and he should be an agent designated for that purpose. So because in this case, Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy was appointed, but he was given the information in a private conversation, and that private conversation cannot be considered to be one from an appointed agent or a designated agent. He is not entitled to be appointed as the next VC. But hypothetically speaking, he were to be given information from a designated agent and he had accepted it before the rescission, then he would be entitled to be appointed as the vice chancellor of the university. But in this case, it was only a private conversation and there was no designated agent, and hence he is not entitled to be appointed as the next VC. Now coming to question number 14. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's move to question number 15 because question number 14 is slightly ambiguous and we'll rectify the explanation once before we send it across. So let's do question number 15 now. Okay. So all of you believe that the student will be liable. Raghav, can you tell me why do you believe D is the right answer?
Sir, just made more sense compared to the other options.
Okay. So the option D reads, the student is liable even though he did not do the act knowing that he might cause damage, as such acts cannot go unpunished. No, we do not really know whether he do it knowingly um, or it's more of a moral argument to make. D says that such acts cannot go unpunished. This is a moral argument which we are making. Uh, Applying the law correctly, we will reach answer option A, which is the student is liable for mischief as he knowingly and wrongfully destroyed the nameplate of the registrar. It's a cleaner option and it correctly gives us the reasoning. Whereas D forays into the ambit of moral persuasion or a moral prescription. And hence D is not really the perfect choice or the most appropriate answer in this case. So Viva, even you have highlighted D as to be the right answer. Do you understand the reasoning now, Viva?
Yes, sir. I got it.
Great, great. So final passage. Okay. So this will be the final passage of the day. 2 minutes for you to read it. Just raise your hand once you have read it.
Sir,
Yes.
about the last question we did, if they had given that he didn't know it, he did it unknowingly, what would be the answer?
If he had known, then we will have to read it again. Okay, let's read it. Whoever with the intent to cause or knowing that is likely to cause. So if he has done it unknowingly, then in this case he will not be liable, because intention and knowledge is a necessary element for the offense of mischief. So if he had done it without knowing, then it would have saved him from the offense or saved him from the punishment. Okay, Arya?
Yeah, but could it be argued that you can't set fire without knowing that it causes damage?
Yes, that can be argued, but we have to understand what the court with the limited facts will reach. So the opposing lawyer will obviously say that even though he did not know he's going to cause fire, but it was reasonable for him to know such thing. Then in this case, there will be a different answer. So it depends on the way the lawyers argue, hypothetically speaking.
Okay.
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 So last pages for the day, please take 2 minutes and then we will solve all the questions. Please raise your hand once you are done reading it. It's a very short passage. Okay, guys, raise your hand once you are done reading with the passage. Okay, so the passage is fairly simple. It concerns the right to private defense. So if anyone is going to harm your property or if is going to harm your body, you have a right to protect yourself. And in protecting yourself, you can apply any force that is reasonably necessary in order to thwart or to prevent that harm. So this is the right to private defense. So if I'm coming with a knife at you, you can also probably shoot me, or with a sword you can kill me, if that is all it takes to protect yourself. If I am taking away, snatching away your purse from your hands, you can slap me, you can thrust me, or you can just force me out of your way. So you have all the right to protect your property, life and limb. So this is something that you have a right of. So based on this explanation, we will understand the following questions. So question number 21: which of these will be a case of private defense? Okay, let's consider each case. There is a person who had beat me in the past and I, on seeing him, instantly shoot him. Now the right to private defense is only available when A, the harm to you or the apprehension of harm to you is immediate in nature, and B, when whatever you are doing is reasonable in nature. So if someone is coming to slap you, you cannot just shoot him, or you just cannot kill him. So you will have to be reasonable. So in the case of A, the harm is not immediate. There has been a past rivalry between you and the other person, but right now there is no fear that he is going to beat you. B, there is a person who comes to dark room and I beat him 10 times with a stick thinking to be a thief. So you do not beat a thief 10 times. If you think he is a thief, you just either run out of the room or beat him just enough so that he cannot steal the property. So you essentially will have to thwart him, not to beat him 10 times. You cannot injure someone unnecessarily. See, I feel that the person is coming with a knife, but it is a sword. In this case, you can obviously have a private defense because you have a reasonable apprehension of fear. There are two persons verbally abusing and I feel that they will end up fighting. I hit one with a stick. So this is very absurd. And I'm glad that none of you have chosen B. Oh, sorry, D. So the right answer is C. That if someone is coming to you with a knife or a sword, you can... Yes?
No action is being taken in C though. He's just stating that a person's coming with a sword, but he thought it was coming with a sword, but it was his, knife, but it was a sword. He didn't do anything against it.
Yeah, so then you have a case of private defense. So the information not given in question C is that what you have done. So in all the other options, there has been this information has been given, and interestingly, it has been missed from in C. But in every other option, we can overrule a case of private defense. So even with the sort of elimination, we can reach option C.
Also in B, I think beating him depends on how hard you beat him, right?
Yes, but 10 times just seems unreasonable. If you're
I
beating,
mean, if you're just slightly tapping him 10 times,
yes, but what is
just
the,
hypothetically, I mean.
yes, what is the impression that you get when I say that I beat someone with a stick 10 times? If I beat someone with a stick 10 times, you will reasonably assume that I am going to beat him with the necessary vigor. Just not going
Yeah.
to, right? So in
Okay.
that case, beating someone 10 times becomes unreasonable.
Okay.
Now, question number 20.
So there's no, so you don't need an actual action to be specified in the question.
I just lost you somewhere in the middle. Can you repeat?
So when they ask us in the exam, a question like this, consider which of these is a case of private defense. So there's no need for an actual action to be specified in the question.
Correct. There's no need. There is only need of immediate harm.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to question number 22. Which of these is a crime against human body? Okay, Amog, can you tell me why you think C is the right answer? Amog?
So encounter killing might be something which is done by the police or someone from a higher authority, and adultery is basically granted by the government of India. So a commercial sale of liver is not, it's actually a crime on the human body.
Okay, so C is the correct answer, and this was a slightly tricky question. Encounter killing, while most of you are given to believe are illegal, is not necessarily illegal. What does encounter killing mean? That you are the police authority encounter a fugitive or a criminal while they are doing their duty, and during that encounter, when there is a fight between the police authority and the criminal, or when there is a violent face-off between the criminal and the police end up killing the fugitive or the person who they have had a face-off with. In such cases, the encounter killing are perfectly reasonable. So there are some cases where the police just take up a person and they kill him without a violent face-off. That is an illegal encounter killing. So encounter killing in general are perfectly legitimate. Secondly, adultery has been 2 years ago has been legalized. So adultery is no longer a crime. So section 398 IPC has been modified, and it has by the Supreme Court has said that adultery is no longer illegal. So there is only one of among the three options, there is only one thing which still remains a crime, which is commercial sale of the liver, and only that will be considered crime against human body. So the correct option is answer C, which is option 3 only. Okay. So moving on to 23. Okay, sorry, I should have tried 23. Okay, so most of you have given the right answer. Let's I examine each option one by one. I kill a regular rover passing by. If a rover is passing by you, you are not entitled to private defense. So there can be a situation where you know someone has been involved in a terrorist attack and he is passing by you. Or let's say the hypothetical Gabbar Singh is passing by you, you just cannot kill him, because that is not something you as a citizen is entitled to do. The best thing you can do is probably inform the police. So you cannot kill a criminal passing by. See, I kill a person because I feel he will steal a handbag that he liked a lot. So if someone is stealing a property from you, you can probably shove him off or just probably thrash him, but you cannot kill him. Or you kill a person who has enmity with your family, something that is not allowed under the right to private defense. So only thing which is allowed is if someone is forcefully entering into your house. So you can do whatever is necessary to prevent him from entering into your house. And that can also include killing him. So answer option B is the correct answer. Question number 24. Okay, again 24 is ambiguous. Let's move to question number 25. Okay, perfect. D is indeed the correct answer, because in order for something to qualify as a right to private defense, the threat has to be immediate, imminent, and our actions should be reasonable. So if you are drunk and declare that you will kill everyone tomorrow, you become a threat tomorrow if you go on with your commitment. So you cannot be shot, because that threat which you pose is not immediate. Similarly, even in this case, in answer option B, you are not posing an immediate threat. You are going to pose an immediate threat on the weekend. So you cannot be killed now. Then if you are a kid and playing with a gun, the proper way is to not shoot you, but to take the gun away from you. So the action that you have taken is unreasonable or disproportionate. Lastly, if you are of unsound mind and take a knife to be then there is a reasonable apprehension that you could kill the person with the knife and then you could be shot. So only in the case of D is your action reasonable. So does anyone have any doubts so far?
So I actually have a question.
So what's the answer again?
D is the right answer. Yes, Aniket.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have a question with the previous passage.
Previous passage. Okay. Sure. Tell me.
Yeah. Can you explain can you explain clause 3 of Article 19 line by line? Because the wording is a little confusing.
Okay, sure. Nothing in subclause B, which is this, of the said clause shall affect the operation of any existing law insofar as it imposes or prevent the state from making any law imposing in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India or public order reasonable restriction on the exercise of the right conferred by the said subclause. So it says that yes, you will be given the freedom to assemble peacefully and without arms, but if there is a law which prohibits certain kind of assembly or assembly for certain cause which the government of India feels is necessary for the sovereignty and integrity of the India, the law will be valid and you will not be allowed to assemble peacefully and without arms for that objective. Does it make you understand what the clause is all about, or should I explain it again, Aniket?
No, sir. I think I understood. So if a law is legislated saying that protest for CA NRC is illegal, then you cannot hold protest for it anymore.
Yes, yes. But then the government will have to justify how those protests are against the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India. This is something that the government will have to prove. The moment they prove it, such protests become illegal.
Okay, but they only have to prove it in the Lok Sabha where it's being passed.
No, they will have to prove it in the Lok Sabha, and as well if there is a challenge to the, if I go and challenge this law, they will have to prove it in court as well.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Does anyone have any other doubt? Guys, anyone have any doubt? Okay, guys, so it was great to have all of you here and to be able to see you. So until next time, goodbye. See you again sometime in one of these legal aptitude classes. Goodbye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.